So here is your review study guide for your review questions, which we'll be having sometime this week. I'm going to do the odd ones, and you're welcome to do the even ones for extra points if you like to. Your job is to turn in at least the odd ones to me by next class. So here we go. This is first of all, we want to identify the fact that this is a quadratic function because it's squared. And that means it has a vertex, and it's either a happy face or a sad face. The vertex is these two numbers, which you always change the sign of the first one. The second one you do not, and that's your vertex. So then we're going to plot that point. Left 1 up 2 would be here. Then you look at the number in the front here. In this case, there is no number, so that's a 1, which means it's a positive 1. And when that's positive, you have a happy face. So there's your parabola. It would look something like that. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next one. Rewrite each quadratic equation below in vertex form. This one is very work intensive. There's a lot involved here. But it's something you want to remember. That's why I'm putting it on the review test. In case you don't realize this, I don't actually review everything. I only review the things that are kind of important. So this is something that you'll probably want to see a little bit later on. So if you look back at your 3.5 notes, it'll be really helpful because there's a lot of steps involved with this. The first thing you do is you move this constant term to the other side. The next thing you do is you factor out the leading coefficient, which leaves, if you divide this by -2 and this by -2, you can find out what's left in here. So -2 divided by -2 leaves a positive 1x squared, and 6 divided by -2 leaves me with a negative 3x. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to complete the square. It's a good thing I'm doing this one because you're going to end up with a decimal here, and I didn't usually give you guys problems with decimals, but I guess I wasn't paying attention here. But I'm doing it, so no biggie. I don't want you guys to get too worried about decimals as I do want you to understand the basic process here. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to complete the square. So what you do is you take half of this number, I'll put a half there, which is negative 1.5, and then you're going to square it, which means you multiply it by itself. So negative 1.5 times negative 1.5 would be negative, well, actually it's going to be positive. Undo that. Two negatives make a positive, right? So negative 1.5 times negative 1.5 makes positive 2.25, and that's what you're going to put right there. The next thing that you're going to do is let me bring all this back up here now, is we're going to fix our balance. So what that entails is taking this number, multiplying it here, and whatever you get, adding it over there. So negative 2 times 2.25, that's going to be negative 4.5, I believe. And what that does is that balances the equation. I added a number over here, but you have to add it to the other side if you want your equation to stay balanced. The next thing that you're going to do is you're going to factor this trinomial. Now, it's a perfect square trinomial, and I gave you guys a shortcut for that. The shortcut is it will always look like x something squared. And that something will always be half of the middle number, so half of 3 is negative 1.5. Over here, we have y, and then combining these two together, you get 4.5. And then the last step is to just go ahead and move this 4.5 over to the other side. And that's how you change a polynomial from standard, or a quadratic equation, I should say, from standard form into vertex form. And by doing that, we can now see our vertex, and we can tell whether it's a happy face or sad face and graph it if we wanted to. But that's the process. All right, let's continue. Number 5. So for number 5, this means plug 0 in for x. This means something else, so we'll get to that in a minute. But for now, if you have 0 in the parentheses, that means just plug 0 in for x. So I'm going to take my expression here, and I'll plug 0 in for the x. Got to follow your order of operations. Parentheses first gives me -1. Then exponents next. -1 squared is 1. A lot of people like to multiply first and then square, but that's wrong. You do the power first and then you multiply. So multiplication gives me 2, and 2 plus 3 is 5. And in case you don't remember, when you plug 0 in for x, what that gives you is your y-intercept. There's that. Now in this case over here, this is a different question. I'm plugging 0 in for y, and what that does is it tells you your x-intercepts. All right. I think I'm going to change this to a 4 just so it doesn't come out to be so ugly. And I'm going to make this a -2. All right. Let's see here. So when you have this, what you do is you take your function, and instead of plugging in 0 for x, you set the function equal to 0 instead, and you solve for x. See, like on this one, you're plugging in a number for x and you're finding the y. On this one, you're plugging in a number for y and finding the x. It's opposite. So in this case, your order for solving is to do your subtraction first. Then you divide. I'm kind of cheating because I changed the numbers here, but I don't plan on giving you guys anything that's too crazy. So I don't want to boggle your minds with something unnecessarily heavy. So now in this case, something special happens. You square root both sides to get rid of that 2, this little power here. But when you do that, you get a plus and a minus over here. It's very easy to forget, so you want to be careful about that. And then you add the 1 over. And when you add the 1 over, you can't really add it to anything, so you just put it in front of the plus and minus there. And there's your final answer. And what those are is those are your roots. So whenever you plug 0 in for y and solve for x, what you're essentially doing is you're finding the x-intercepts, also known as the roots. So plugging 0 in for x gives you your y-intercept. Plugging 0 in for y gives you your x-intercepts. So that's another question you guys can expect to see in your exam. I will let you guys do 7 and 8 on your own. Another thing you guys can be expecting to see on your review exam is a quadratic formula question, which is another way to find the roots. But in that case, you're finding, notice how we've got 0 plugged in for the y value? So we're finding roots. But this is in standard form. It's not in vertex form like the last question was. When that's the case, the way you do it is with your quadratic formula. So the x values, or the roots, would be -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. So I simplify these 4 groups first. Double negatives gives me 8. 64 take away, you got to be careful here, bring down your minus. And sometimes if you end up with negatives over here, it can change things a little bit. I get 12 times 7, which is 84. 2 times 3 is 6. 64 take away 84 is -20. So that's the next thing you do, is simplify that. And now we got to work on this. So first of all, -20, that's an imaginary number. You can't have an I under the square root. Next, you got to break down your 20. 20 is 4 times 5, and 4 is 2 times 2. I can take out a 2. And so that's our answer for that root. So now I'm going to take this expression here and I'm going to rewrite it now as 8 plus or minus 2i root 5 over 6. And I'm going to reduce what these three numbers have in common. And all three of those can be reduced by 2. So that leaves me with 4 plus or minus I root 5 over 3. That's the quadratic formula. And when you have an imaginary root like that, that means it actually doesn't touch the x-axis, but you have to be able to simplify it to that point anyway. Okay, let's go ahead and continue our journey here. We've got the quadratic formula underway. Talk about simplifying imaginary complex numbers. So this is pretty easy. When you have plus, you just combine your like terms. 1 and negative 5 makes negative 4. Negative 3 and negative 4 makes negative 7. And there's your answer. This one's going to be kind of the same. I'm not going to finish it for you, but I will tell you the first step. The first step is to distribute the negative, which changes the signs in the second expression. So that's the difference between adding and subtracting. This is multiplication, so we're going to do the box method. Can't really do any shortcuts, unfortunately. So negative 7, negative 5 makes positive 35. Negative 7, negative 3i makes positive 21i, and so on. So here's what I have. I've got 35, negative 15, and 21 makes positive 6i, and then minus 9i squared. Now there is a little bit of difference, though. When we did this before with polynomials, but when you're dealing with imaginary numbers, I squared, in case you forgot, is actually a real number. It's negative 1. So wherever you have an I to the second power, you're going to replace that with a negative 1. So this becomes positive 9, because negative 9 is negative 1, makes a positive 9. And then you're going to combine the two real numbers together, 35 and 9. So 35 plus 9 is 44. And there's your answer for that one. Number 17. In case you guys forgot, what is I? I is the square root of a negative 1. And something that we've learned is that we don't like square roots in the bottom. And the way that you deal with that is you multiply the square root by itself. So in this case, I'm going to multiply I by I. But whatever you do to the bottom, you have to do the top. So that's going to give me 5i on the top and 7i squared on the bottom. And as I already told you guys, I squared is a negative 1, right? Which means now I've got 5i over negative 7 with a negative here. Well, these two negatives just cancel, and you're left with positive 5i over 7. Couple more things we're going to do. We're going to talk about graphing lines. This is a linear function, y equals mx plus b. In this case, our m is negative 1, which you can think of as negative 1 over 1. And my b isn't there, which means it's 0. So when you're graphing a line, you start at your y-intercept, and then you use your slope. With a negative slope, you go down and right. So I'm going to go down 1 over 1, and there we go. With a positive slope, you go up and right. But notice, you always go to the right. The only thing that changes is whether you're going up or down. Let's go ahead and take a look at number 21. Another thing that we learned this year was how to find the equation of a line. This is a very common skill, and it's something you want to know how to do. You're going to see it in almost every class after this. The first thing that you have to do is you have to find your slope. Then you have to find your b, and then you can write your equation. Okay? Slope, in case you guys forgot, is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. That's what these are. They're both pairs of x's and y's. We can call one pair the 1's and the other pair the 2's, and it doesn't matter which pair you call the 1's and which pair you call the 2's. But now that we're going to plug it in the formula, my y2 is 5, my y1 is a negative 4, my x2 is a negative 4, and my x1 is a 5. And so I end up with a positive 9, double negatives make a positive, over a negative 9, which is a negative 1. So I've got my m. Then I got to find my b. The way that you find the b is you go to this formula, and you're going to plug in something here, here, and here and solve for b. So just pick one of your x and y pairs. I'll do this one. In this case, my y value is 5. My slope, which I just found earlier, is negative 1, right? And my x, which is here, is negative 4. And I just have to solve for b. So now I've got 5 equals 4 plus b. Double negatives makes a positive. Minus the 4 on both sides, and I get 1. So my b value is 1, my m is negative 1. So now I can write my equation. I just need to fill in the blanks for what my m is and for what my b is. My m was negative 1, my b was positive 1. And there's the answer. All right, last thing on your guys' exam for review is how to solve equations. Something that'll get you through almost every problem is something that I like to call, don't call me stupid. It stands for distribute, combine your like terms, move the smaller x over, and then after that you should have a 1 or 2 step equation that you can solve easily. So in this case, we're going to start by distributing. Anytime you have parentheses with a number directly in front of it, you're going to do distribution. So negative 3 times 1 is negative 3. Negative 3 times negative r is positive 3r. Then we combine like terms. Now combining like terms is something that happens on one side of the equal sign. So we have a left side and a right side. On the left, there are no like terms to combine. But on the right, there is. This 3r and this negative 7 can be put together. 3 take away 7 is negative 4. After that, you move the smaller x over. So negative 4 is smaller than negative 1. So I'm going to move the 4r by doing the opposite on both sides like that, which gives me 3r equals negative 3. And this is gone now. After that, you should be able to solve. We want to get r by itself. So the first thing you would do is add the 27 over, which gives me 24, and then we would divide, and we get r equals 8. And that's the end of your guys' review.